Today, we're establishing a new forum for industry leaders to share their thoughts and perspectives on the global wine marketplace and how California wines can participate in and shine in that marketplace. To kick things off, I'd like to welcome Bobby Cook, the president and CEO of Wine Institute, who's going to share his expert insights into some recent activities in this dynamic international trade environment in which we all find ourselves. Bobby?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. What a terrific turnout. It is a pleasure to welcome you today to the first of its kind program on California wine exports. I want to extend a special California wine welcome to our guests from outside the U.S. We greatly appreciate your traveling to be with us today to share your insights and experience. Wine Institute has led the efforts to expand opportunities for California wineries by removing trade barriers and promoting export sales in key markets around the world for more than 35 years. In these joint efforts, creating a level playing field while building markets by showcasing the outstanding quality, diversity, sustainability, and unique nature of our wines continue to be a priority for our organization. Needless to say, it is a challenging time in international trade, but we are confident that as the world's fourth largest wine producer, there is great opportunity for significant growth in key markets around the world. So today's program will focus on how we get there on the marketing side, working with our vintners, our regions, and in-country partners. And I'd like to spend a moment sharing some recent successes in trade policy that will have a big impact. These developments benefit all U.S. wine exports, with California accounting for 95% of our nation's exports. Canada is the number one single country market for California wine exports. And after years of work with the Obama and Trump administrations and at the World Trade Organization, Wine Institute was successful in gaining access to the British Columbia grocery stores for California wines. The Canadian government has amended its regulations to end the policy that allowed only BC wine in grocery stores. And the province of Ontario has also taken steps to end such policies and expand grocery store sales of California wines as a result of Wine Institute advocacy. Japan is the fourth largest market for California wines. And at the urging of Wine Institute, the U.S. government secured an agreement with Japan to eliminate tariffs on U.S. wine. Effective January 1, tariff on U.S. wines were reduced by half and will phase out to zero by 2025. So we will be on par with wine imports from most other major wine exporting countries. We are also closely monitoring developments in the UK and already secured an agreement to ensure a smooth transition for wine trade prior to its departure from the EU. And we will continue advocating for a US-UK free trade agreement that eliminates all wine tariffs. Wine Institute has also forcefully articulated its long-standing position that wine should not be targeted with retaliatory tariffs in trade disputes that do not involve wine. We are one of the two founding signatories of a landmark statement signed just last month calling for the immediate elimination of all tariffs on wine traded between the U.S. and the European Union, better known as Zero for Zero. We saw the impact of these efforts this past Friday when the USTR announced no new tariffs on imported wine, despite threats from the administration to do so. And as a result, U.S. wines are less likely to face retaliatory tariffs in the near future. This by no means signals the end of our tariff challenges, but it is an encouraging sign that we will continue our work on tariff elimination. Our wineries are in the export business for the long term, and these challenges are only temporary. Our vintners and growers are the most talented, innovative, and dedicated in the world. Our large state, larger than many countries, enjoys an ocean influence and unique topography that creates grapes and wines that are different and distinct. And our team in Washington, D.C., advancing international trade policy, and in California and markets around the world, advancing export sales, second to none. So it is clear the prospects for California wine are very bright. I want to thank you all for being here today. It's a terrific turnout. Enjoy the day. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Bobby. Little did I know when I joined the Wine Institute just last April that we would experience such dramatic, and some might say unprecedented, volatility in the global wine market. This volatility is being driven primarily by factors that we can't control, from trade wars and tariffs to currency fluctuation, from Brexit to the coronavirus outbreak. Overlay these events with rapidly changing consumer preferences and how, when, and where they buy their wines. In volatile market environments, our tendency is to seek stability. Stability in the things that we can control. We invest in the quality of our wines and the character of our fruit. We invest in our sustainable practices, in the vineyard, in the winery, in our businesses, in our employees, and in their communities. We invest in our brands and how we tell their stories to the world. And we know from experience that these are the elements that will be central to our future success in the global wine market. And yet with volatility, there also comes opportunity. And that is what today is all about. Discovering where our next opportunities lie and learning how to leverage them. Last year, total US wine exports came in nearly $1.5 billion in sales. Our goal at Wine Institute is to exceed $2 billion by 2030. And of course, to have California wine to continue to be more than 95% of those total sales. The way that we'll achieve that goal is not by sticking with the status quo. The way that we'll achieve that goal is by building momentum in our current markets, by expanding into new markets, and by bringing more California wineries into export sales. We're going to be touching on all of those areas today in our program. We're going to be looking at the big picture, and we have some of the most revered and respected minds in the wine industry that will help provide strategic context for us. We'll also delve deep into some of the most transformative tactics and best practices. So whether you're experienced in export or just beginning to look at the powerful potential of international markets, our program today will offer you critical intelligence and specific tools to help you succeed. Before we launch into our program, I'd like to first acknowledge some people whose hard work made today possible. First, we are indebted to the very talented team at O'Donnell Lane, led by Steve Burns and Josh Heiser, along with Rebecca Johnson and Katie Canfield. Thank you. But today would not have been possible without the very talented team at Wine Institute, including, of course, Diane Berardi and Carly Quinn, and our communications team led by Nancy Light and Gladys Horiyuchi. Thank you so much to them as well. As a fourth-generation Californian and a proud member of a sixth-generation farming family, I like to say that soil is in my veins, but California is in my heart. We all know that California is a special place. It's a state of mind, really. It's a land of dreamers, of big thinkers, pioneers, and scene makers. And I feel so fortunate to have the opportunity to share the story of your wines around the globe. And I know that together we can lead the world to rediscover California wine. So let's get started. And today, and there are no better pioneers to lead us. Oops, I think I'm supposed to change slides. And there are no better pioneers to lead us on this journey than these two brilliant, insightful, amazingly interesting women who truly need no further introduction. So I'd like to welcome Jancis Robinson and Elaine Chukan Brown to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm nervous. Thank you all for being here. We thought we should introduce ourselves just a little bit. So thank you for saying that. So I am lucky enough to speak about wine and do wine seminars all over the world. And so I'm based here in California and very passionate about California wine, but lucky enough to see how it's received in different markets all over the country and all over the world. And then, of course, also write about it. And so I'm really grateful today to get to bring those things together and speak with Jancis and with all of you about how California looks around the world.
Great. And I have probably even more of a global perspective because every few years I've got to update these two massive books, the World Atlas of Wine and the Oxford Companion to Wine. And we're lucky enough to have consultants around the world who share their perceptions of what's going on in their own particular parts of the world. So I think I see California in a global context, but some of you may not realize how important California has been to my life. I first came here in 1969, and I've been coming here probably on average once a year ever since then. My very first article in a national newspaper was in the 70s, spreading the news in Britain that Moet and Chandon were investing in Napa Valley. And I met my husband, Nick Lander, the Financial Times restaurant critic, in the American Embassy in London when I was secretary of something called the Zinfandel Club, which was formed by people like Harry Warr and Hugh Johnson to spread the word of just how great California wine was. And I was organizing a tasting of every single California wine that was then imported into the UK. This was in November 1980. And my husband was then importing a range, or my future husband, was then importing a range of inexpensive varietals from Souverain. So he exhibited there, and I met him there, and he explained that he'd realized how difficult it was to make money importing wine and wanted to find a little wine bar, so at least he cut out one layer of the profit. And he'd ended up investing in this massive and rather beautiful townhouse in Soho that became a restaurant called L'Escargot, which was very popular in the 80s. Robert Mondavi turned up on the first night because its USP was that it had an all-American wine list. And effectively, Nick and my first date or first trip abroad was coming over here to select wines for that wine list. And it was very successful, although there was the instance of the party of 6 Frenchmen who came in, ordered their meal, looked at the wine list, got up, and walked out. But ever since then, separately, Nick and I actually both had a strong feeling that we wanted to live in California for quite a while. And it was a magical time, I should just say, that in the early 80s, it was a magical time for California wine in the UK, and it started to seep out into other European markets too, because partly because the dollar was weak, I have to say, but that we got this great range of really good California wines, and just as importantly, a great range of California winemakers who used to come over at least once a year and tell us all about their products, and obviously really enjoyed exporting to to Europe, and that has changed, I think, since that time.
You know, with that length of history with California, can you say more? What else has changed in that time?
In California?
Yeah, with California and its perception abroad as well.
Yes, well, of course, in the 80s, we were still in the kind of basking in the afterglow of the famous Paris tasting, which really showed how well Californian wines could perform. And there was just this huge well of enthusiasm here, of a whole load of new people starting estates and wanting to share the excitement of the fact that California could produce this lovely wine that could stand up against European competition. But I'm personally not a fan of the trend throughout the 90s. And some of the best wines that I taste today are the California wines from the 70s, sometimes 60s even if I'm lucky, because there are some nice old cellars in Britain. 70s, maybe early 80s. But then that trend to, you know, long hang time, much richer, riper, sometimes oakier, certainly stronger wines didn't chime well with the European consumer. And what chimed even worse with the European consumer was the rapid increase in prices. So, I mean, I don't know whether we want to get on to total perceptions of California
no, maybe
wine
we can
now.
wait a bit,
but there certainly has been a sea change, and probably Andrew will be talking later, I think, about specifically the detail of the UK market. But suffice it to say that at the moment, it's a whole mass of very inexpensive California wine that we see on the bottom shelf of the supermarket. And I suspect that a high proportion of the people who buy it neither know nor care where it comes from. It's a brand,
wine.
yes,
Yeah.
and it's the price is the driver. And then in some specialist importers will have a handful of some of the really most famous names, but they don't dash off the shelf, unfortunately, as some of you may know. And there is this great big gap in the middle, which we might want to talk about. Yeah.
So I think we should keep with the positive things for a little bit, though. Let's go ahead and stay there first. But so, talking about this evolution, you know, from the 80s into the 90s, what do you think are the predominant trends globally today, though?
Yeah, and I think you should come in on this as well. I mean, what I see, I think the wine world is in a greater state of flux today than I have ever known it in my 44 plus years writing about it. You know, we all started off heading in one direction. Sort of worldwide, everyone wanted to make copies of the famous wines of France. And there wasn't perhaps that much variety. You know, everyone was planting Cabernet and Chardonnay and a handful of international varieties and trying to make something as like white Burgundy and red Bordeaux as possible. But today, and we had a sort of agreed ranking, you know, everybody agreed that you know, Chateau Lafite was at the top of the tree, and you know, Opus 1 was in there somewhere, and people were looking for 100-point wines that they were chasing. And as I say, everyone going in the same direction. And now it is so much more free form, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And I remember quite a famous British wine merchant saying to me, I fell in love with wine when I tasted Mouton 45 as a teenager. And I'm so sad that nowadays no young people will be able to afford a first growth and experience what I did. I said, I don't think that matters one little bit. What newer wine people, younger wine drinkers want is breadth. They don't want to just go to the top of the tree. They want to have a little taste of a Jura and a little taste of Santa Rita Hills and a little taste of Mornington Peninsula and different ways of making wine. And they certainly want a change from a handful of international grape varieties. Mm-hmm. And I think perhaps stylistically there's been a huge change, hasn't there? And, that people are no longer chasing alcohol, oak, colour. And in fact, you could argue in some parts of the world it's perhaps gone almost too far the other way, where there are some people who think, if I pick the grapes when they're underripe, there's bags of acid, not much colour, everyone will think it, and hardly any alcohol, everyone will think it's fantastic. And personally, I think there's a wonderful medium, mid-ground in there, quite a big mid-ground, in fact. But there's no doubt about it that for most consumers in the world that I meet, and I travel a heck of a lot, alcohol is a negative. Oakiness is a very strong negative. It's funny. You know, I taste with a lot of people, and if they smell oak, they go, ugh! You know? It's weird. I mean, I'm not anti-oak in that way. I think if it's top quality oak, in a wine that you know is designed to be aged, so when it's ready, it'll all be integrated. I think that's fine. But there are a lot of oak phobes out there. Mm-hmm. Do you want to fill in some of my gaps?
Well, so, I mean, I think one of the things you and I have spent quite a bit of time talking about is just this move to more lightness and freshness. But again, I mean, I think, you know, last night we were talking about how there's also this sort of micro trend to what I call acid water wines. They're picked so incredibly early. Yeah. They have a hint of color, but really you're just drinking acid and barely can taste the variety at all.
Which is, you know. So I think, and we agree that's, but with all trends, there are extremes, aren't there?
Yeah.
And I don't think that the fact that those acid things, what did you call them?
Acid water
waters things.
Yeah.
I don't think that means that the trend to freshness is a bad thing.
No, I
agree. It's just that they've done it too much.
Yeah.
But personally, I'm thrilled that there are so many more wines in the world today that you don't have to monitor every sip because you've looked on the label and it says 15.5%, so you know you're going to suffer the next morning if you drink too much of it. I think, you know, that range of 12 to 14 is, for me personally, ideal. It's healthier, after all. And wines that go with food so much better than the sort of big, high alcohol monsters.
Yes. I mean, I think one of the interesting side effects of the success of international varieties like Cabernet and Chardonnay and Pinot is that, weirdly, they actually open the door for us to look to other things. And so there's a greater diversity of styles and places and varieties coming out. And it seems to me that then the excitement and enthusiasm for trying new things is now reinvigorating how we approach the international traditional varieties too. So that lightness and freshness is kind of going across the board.
I agree. But I do think that there has been this explosion of interest in different grape varieties, hasn't there? Particularly indigenous grape varieties. But when, with a couple of co-authors, Julia Harding and José Vuillermoz, we sat down to write a guide to every single grape variety we could find that was in commercial production. And the book came out in 2012 called Wine Grapes, which means that we had to hand in the manuscript in probably 2011 or something like that. And even then, we found 1,368 different grape varieties that were making wine in commercial production. And such has been the interest in finding obscure varieties that if we were to sit down and write the book today, we know for sure there would be 1,500. So that's a lot of new varieties. Well, not new varieties. Yes, there have been a few new varieties being bred, but mainly they're rediscovering ancient varieties. And I love the fact that that is going on here in California too.
Yeah, preserving old vines and reinvigorating interest in that. And we have, you know, one of the things you've written about online is how California is really one of the great treasure stores for old vines.
Yeah, you are so lucky to have all these old vines here, almost sort of by historical accident partly, isn't it? Thanks to Prohibition. That was one of the good effects of Prohibition, that people didn't pull out all those old vines. I've just spent a week in Argentina, where they are doing exactly the same thing, chasing after ancient vines. And they can probably rival you, actually, with the average age of those old vines. And they, you know, you might probably the average American consumer's view of perception of Argentine wine, perhaps not yours, but would be something pretty big and monstrous and something to eat with a huge, huge steak. But gosh, they are galloping towards freshness and lightness and planting ever higher up the Andes to achieve that.
Yes. Well, and don't you think that contrast of what people assume Argentine wine is versus what's actually happening there is a parallel to California on the international stage,
Absolutely.
too?
Good segue, yes. I do. Yes, because I'm very aware of the perception of California wine, which is not the same as the reality. But when I travel around the world, far too many wine drinkers think that California wine is all about very expensive, very big-boned alcoholic Napa Cabernet with a cult following and a price tag that they will never, ever afford. And there's a lot of sort of envy there, actually. And you all know that Napa Cab, and especially Napa Cab of the sort I've just described, represents the tiniest proportion of all California wine. But I think people look at California and they look at your beautiful climate and your lovely food and, just your great lifestyle. And there's a sort of element of envy and the fact that you get away, or some people get away with selling wine that's so expensive. That translates into, why can't we sell a $100 bottle? But California is not the only place to suffer from this, and as I say, that I know that is not the whole picture by any means. Bordeaux suffers in exactly the same way because it has some very, very expensive wines at the top end, which the common wine drinker and even the common wine professional feels they will never be able to afford. And so they dismiss the whole of Bordeaux as being full of really expensive wines, and that is absolutely not the case.
Well, in reality, Bordeaux and Bordeaux Superior are by far and away the biggest production and quite affordable.
Absolutely.
And
I
smart
keep
wines,
saying some of the best value in the world is Petit Chateau Bordeaux, the sort of stuff you can pick up for, $20 a bottle or something like that.
Well, so this gets us to a challenge. So we have to talk about hard things, right? Because we're trying to motivate this sort of movement forward for California wine. And the only way to be able to grow in the way that Honore referenced is to be willing to shake things up and face, where's the challenge? Now how do we find solutions, right? And so one of the things I hear implicit in what you're describing, you talked about there's a lot of really inexpensive wines kind of on the bottom shelves where people aren't even concerned with where they're from, they're just buying them because they're affordable. And then we have like grandiose, famous, super expensive, ungettable wines, but I haven't heard you mention
the middle.
Yes.
And the middle, to me, is the excitement of California wine at the moment, isn't it? Because it's a more dynamic scene, the sort of mid-range California wines than I've ever known it. Lots of discoveries, lots of newer grape varieties, rediscovered grape varieties, old vines, different ways of making wine. And really, I think to sort of re-dynamize the perception of California wine, those wines in that category have got to get out there. Plus, maybe some of the great value, slightly older brands that are also in the middle, that have real quality that appeals to people who care about wine, as opposed to just the commodity stuff that's liquid and alcoholic.
Well, so this is something we haven't talked about exactly, but what do we say to the brands that have a business model dependent on, let's say, an $80 to $100+ bottle of wine? How do they kind of help fill in the middle? Do we suggest they come up with also an entry, less expensive?
Well, I would have thought so, yes,
Yeah.
because that's not, I don't see that it harms the brand if it's clearly signaled that this is their lesser line.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know, like here in, if we were to reference some of these kind of middle price wines, even here in Napa, like as an example, Chapelet has their Chenin, and they, export that in the $30 range, and probably the Cabernet helps fill in some of the gap for them to make that work, but that keeps them on the shelves and keeps Chenin from Chapelet and History of Napa in everybody's mind internationally. Another great example, I think, too, you could go to the most remote restaurant in Vietnam, and Au Bon Clement is on the wine list.
Well, good for Jim.
Yeah.
Only this morning, actually, I was asked to choose a wine, choose the red for a dinner that we're having at Clark's restaurant. Clark's in London has been a great supporter of California wine, actually, because Sally Clark's a great friend of Alice Waters. And we are entertaining all the publishers who will publish a foreign edition of the latest World Atlas of Wine soon after I get back, because it's the London Book Fair. So Hugh Johnson and I will be the hosts. And I was sent the Clark's wine list, and I chose an Au Bon Clement Pinot Noir. So there you go.
Well, and some of you know I grew up in Alaska, which is essentially a foreign country, and we're very weird up there. And I worked to shake it off, but it's not quite worked yet. But the first red wine I ever had was Murrieta Old Vine Red. And
so that's a perfect example of the sort of a perfect locomotive for getting California into people's consciousness of what it should taste like and value, great value, yeah.
Yeah, and I know a couple of months ago, too, you featured Bedrock's
shebang.
Bedrock
Shebang is a lovely, lovely introduction, and it speaks of California, it's redolent of California history, and it's priced right.
So what are some other things, though, that, California is this incredibly special place, which does trigger envy in the way that you described. But there's a sense in which the rest of the world should be jealous of us, And so, let's talk about that for a minute. What are some of the special things about California that do really stand out, that should be talked about and celebrated internationally?
I suppose, one really important thing is how cooperative, generally speaking, certainly here, the wine industry is. Somebody was saying, I've only been here since Sunday morning, but somebody said they're very keen on Rhone wines, and they'd traveled to the Rhone, and they went to a kind of gathering of famous Rhone producers. And one famous one hadn't heard of Jamais, didn't know who Jamais was. They just operate completely independently. Whereas here, that does seem to me that there is a wonderful cooperation and a feeling that you are all going in the same direction. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I do. And I also think that's really the key to some of the smaller producers' long-term success, and also the potential for them to be able to reach into export. So the more that that producers here are working together and collaborating through the regional groups, whether that's California as a whole or specific subzones within California, the more people can collaborate, you're effectively multiplying your capital, your means to get out there, to get seen, and one of the exciting things I have seen in some regions is people will travel internationally and they'll represent their region. So their wine will be one of 10 wines maybe. And when people can form groups like that and work together, they're getting themselves and their cohort in front of a bigger audience and guaranteeing they get in front of that audience over and over and over again. I think collaboration is part of the spirit of California, and the more we can build on that, the easier it's going to be to increase our positive presence, to increase the room for mid-price wines to get in front of people and help change the world. And I think especially as we face this change in generation that's happening right now, too, who are the new wine buyers, it's easy to complain about millennials. The media really loves to do that. But the truth is that millennial buying habits reflect an interest in collaboration and community investment. And so by going out into the marketplace and showing you're doing that, you're actually endearing yourself to the new generation of buyers coming up, too, I think.
And I was just putting myself in thinking about wine events in London. We are spoiled. We've got a massively stuffed wine trade calendar. But if ever 2 or 3 producers from somewhere come together and do a presentation. It is so much richer than if just one does. And it's very nourishing and rewarding when you see people talking to each other and admiring each other. And it's a sort of halo effect. It's not just 3 times, it's more than 3 times as good to listen to 3 people cooperating and praising each other's wines.
I think it's a subtle indication of confidence too. Like our wines are so
yes,
good, we
don't
can
mind,
share.
Don't mind comparing them with somebody else's.
And so it kind of, in multiple ways, encourages more people to attend.
Another thing that I think I hugely admire California for, but I don't have the kind of, I couldn't quantify it, but I have a very distinct impression that in many respects, the most quality-conscious growers here, and I don't mean just growers, I mean producers, wine producers as well, have been at the forefront of a lot of developments, particularly in viticulture, that I've seen copied in Bordeaux, where they've got this huge research institute, and you'd think they'd be ahead of the curve. But I think that the top California producers have taken more trouble than the producers anywhere else in the world, and precision viticulture and all those kind of things, just getting every detail right. Maybe an outsider might say, well, the prices they charge, they can afford to do all that, but that's not to decry the achievement, and so it's been quite fun for me to see a first growth chateau suddenly starting something, say, that Harlan did a few years before, or that kind of thing. So I think California can be very proud in that respect.
Well, and it's a good reminder, too, that the old model of Burgundy, Bordeaux at the top and everybody else underneath isn't the same, isn't there anymore.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And, Bordeaux, I'm afraid, is pretty out of fashion at the moment. So there's a big gap there for California to jump into.
Well, and when I, traveling internationally, I actually am really curious about how viticulture is handled in different places based on growing needs, but also just cultural habits. And the truth is, I don't see any other country pushing the envelope as far as I do in California with trying to really innovate. How do we reduce our vineyard inputs? How do we reduce water? How do we increase the health of the soil and the vine, and thereby also quality in the wine? And California just has a sense of innovation with growing, with vine growing that I don't see
Yes,
elsewhere.
and it probably helps that, in a sense, it doesn't have a long modern history. That everything started afresh, kind of thing.
Yeah, there's room. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this, though, it ties into in an interesting way to if California is ahead of the curve with viticulture, how do we see that showing up? One of the other global trends is increased interest in place, more and more site-specific, regionally specific.
Yeah.
So how does California play on that?
Yes, I mean, all over the world, I see a huge increase in single vineyard wines in particular, but even just everybody wanting to express terroir seems to be the trend. And clearly, we're talking now about the upper half of the market, not the bottom half. But I love seeing as specific an appellation as possible. And I have a slight yen for more use of even the sub-AVAs in Napa now that you've got them. I would love to see them used more so that the consumer can learn more about the characteristics of St. Helena versus Oakville or whatever, And I think to fall in with that global trend of geographical specificity would do California a lot of good, actually.
Right, so kind of a next stage of growth.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Really celebrating how specific things
Yeah,
can be.
yeah.
Well, especially with conjunctive labeling,
So that's not, I'm not saying dispense with the magic words Napa Valley on the label, but add the region, the sub-region.
Because I know, one of the arguments I hear is, well, as soon as you leave California, people don't know where these smaller subzones are. But of course, if you have the known region...
They'll never know if you don't put them on. I mean, there was a time when nobody knew where Meursault was, or, or Chambertin, or,
Well, and it seems like another way of asserting confidence,
Yeah.
saying, I believe so much in my wine growing and my place that I'm putting it on the label. Yeah.
I mean, I've heard the argument that, I don't want to give any geographical hints about where these grapes came from because, I don't want the grower to take the credit, sort of thing. But that seems rather antithetical to me in the modern era when, you go to a restaurant sometimes and you're told what color socks the cheesemaker was wearing. Yeah. I think it's a trend, and it shows it puts you in a good light if you're sharing the glory.
Yes, I agree, and you can also adjust your conversation based on receptivity of the place too. So if both St. Helena and Napa Valley, to use your example, are on the label.
Yeah.
You might just talk about Napa Valley in some places, but it gives you the opening to talk about your more specific location as well.
Yeah.
So talking about place and farming, I think, pushes us into the next obvious question. The one guaranteed thing I will be asked about doing seminars anywhere in the world is climate change. I'll also say that one of the jokes that comes up regularly is that the United States is the only country in the world that doesn't believe climate change is a fact. And so there's a little bit of a climb that we have to face there. And so, California does really lead the way internationally in terms of sustainability and sustainability certifications. But what's per sustainability? I'm making a subtle distinction there. But what is the perception of that internationally?
Yeah. Well, I was there was an article on jancisrobinson.com in 2018 by Monty Walden, who writes a lot about organic and biodynamic viticulture. And he did an audit of every country or region and of what proportion of their vineyards were certified. And top proportion was Alsace as a region, was 15% was certified organic. And because he was writing it in 2018, probably the stats were from 2016. New Zealand was 12%, France overall was 9%, Italy was 11%, and California was 2% of certified organic. So whatever is said about sustainability, it's not by any means leading the way in absolute, provable, certified practices of organic viticulture.
So notice what just happened too, right? This is a learning moment for everyone in the room. And Jancis and I both speak to trade groups all over the world. And I asked about sustainability, and she immediately talked about organics, right? The truth is that the trade is interested in organics. And there's a massive skepticism all over the world about the value of sustainability programs. This is one of the hard things that I think we really need to take some time to, over the next while as a group. This is a great place to collaborate, right? What do we want to mean by sustainability? What do we want to be known for? Who do we want to be known as, right? That's what we have to answer with sustainability. The truth is that there are a lot of legitimate ways to argue that herbicides and glyphosate could be a better option, but at the end of the day, what people hear is that you're saying poison's a good choice, right? And so there's kind of no way to argue your way around the idea that you're using poison, even though I have spent a lot of time trying to listen to vintners about this, and there are a lot of legitimate arguments for why actually these kinds of practices reduce other problems, right? But that's not what's being heard by the public. So one of the things we have to think about is that there's a lot of skepticism, people thinking that, oh, you use the word sustainable, you're actually greenwashing. And so then they look to organic certification, and then the numbers don't look as great, So what are some things, though, that California can do to address this kind of concern?
Well, I was thinking it also going hand in hand with, if one place in the world, I think, can and perhaps is, look at sustainability in a holistic sense, I would think it's California. and because I think you've always been very, well, perhaps not always, but are now very, very aware of the labour force and the need to look after your vineyard workers in particular. I think you are looking at and with shortage of natural resources in terms of water, for instance, you've taken the most amazing steps to manage water supply and the environment, which of course is that's something that you can boast about. I mean, I know it's not controversy free, but you've been brilliant at managing your environment and the landscape and all the rest. So perhaps you can boast of taking a broader approach to sustainability, but I think as Elaine intimates, you've got to be very careful that you really do the business of looking viticulturally rather than just ticking a few boxes.
Yeah, I think, speaking with MWs and buyers and sommeliers all over the world, one of the things that people really want to see is transparency and actual tangible examples. And I think
an outside audit.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And one of the things that there's more and more interest in is conversations about how the actual farming, the growing is being done. Our history in wine is talking about the wine and the winemaker, but as we're increasing our interest in place and terroir expression, that naturally points us back to the vineyard. And the more we can be transparent about these practices, the more readily people are going to understand how complex sustainability actually is, because it's holistic. One thing isn't a problem or a blessing, right? It's always in this larger context. The more transparency and tangibility we can bring to the conversation, the easier it is for people to see the good work that really is being done here.
And it is so complex, as you all know. Everything is connected to something else, and but I think we should single out Jackson Family Wines, who have conducted their own carbon emissions audit, haven't they? And with Torres, Familia Torres of Catalonia in northeast Spain, they've formed this. We can never remember the name of it.
International Wineries for Climate Change. We were saying earlier it should probably be International Wineries Against Climate Change.
Yes.
But
anyway,
yeah.
But I think it would be, they're at the moment wanting to make their group as big as it possibly can be, and they are welcoming new people to sign up. And really, I was with Catena in Argentina. They're doing more or less the same thing. They've got an initiative in Argentina where people sign up and then they have to agree to get better every year. But I would encourage you to look into international wineries for climate change and think about joining, because it's all about helping you take the right steps.
Right. Well, and it's a great example of collaboration and the idea of international collaboration too. There's no better way, again, for California to show its confidence than to say, we're so sure that what we're doing is of benefit, and yet that we have so much more to learn that we're willing to collaborate with people around the world. And the truth is that's part of what we're doing today too, right? We've brought in wine professionals and experts from around the world so that we can all share ideas together. And I think that's really the future of how to keep growing and moving forward. And this initiative that Jackson family helped motivate from here in California is an example of that. And it's another great way of increasing your capital, right? In the sense that if you're a smaller winery and you're trying to figure out how do I improve my practices, how do I hear from the leaders in the world, well, you can be part of a group. And I think California, the first sort of vineyard sustainability formal external audit program in the world started here in California, right? So California has been innovating and leading in this regard for a long time, but to be a leader, you have to continue to lead. It's an opportunity California has to really show we are leading on real sustainability. We are working together. We're working together with other countries even to lead the charge. And it's a great response, I think, to showing that we're leading in this kind of way as a strong way of responding to questions like, why are our wines so expensive?
Yeah, exactly.
And what is sustainability?
And you know, many Californians can argue our wages are higher than anywhere else in the world. Our land costs are higher than practically anywhere else in the world. You know, there are a lot of arguments for justifying price. Yeah. But weren't we also, I don't know whether we want to switch so completely, weren't we going to just mention a few of the kind of more exciting new wines that are coming on, and I think, again, could fill that middle gap. You know, like the Tendu, is it that range? Tendu, you know, that's the Mathiasen, isn't it?
Yes, Tendu. It's even in a liter bottle. They have a white and a red.
And that's the sort of thing that just will appeal to especially younger wine drinkers, and at a great price.
Yeah.
Were you talking about Calder? Did you mention Calder?
Yeah, Calder, of course. You know, it's an exciting second generation project. You know, Frog Sleep and Trace Saboris get together and make Rory Williams and his brand Calder. And he's a great example of someone changing the conversation on farming as well. So not just through Calder, but he's helped lead the way with shifting to year-round, full-time vineyard workers, you know, so that there's a kind of ethical element in terms of care for workers too, which I think is as you were pointing out, an important part of thinking about sustainability.
Yeah, and all that, if that could be communicated more, I think that would do great things for California wine's image, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of these things are already in place here in California, and it's a matter of building them and then showing we're building them. You know, bringing in communicators that really help show this is here, this has been here for a while, this is already happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know one of the newer brand that I've been excited about too, Mountain Tides has released a $20 California Petite Syrah. That's just a champ of a wine, and his motivation was he started learning about wine in the Midwest, and it was really hard to find the wines he was reading about at an affordable price, and so he wanted to do exactly what you're talking about, kind of fill that middle tier. And so he promised himself within a couple of years of starting his label, he'd have a $20 wine.
And the first set of wines I tasted here on Sunday night was from the confusingly similarly named Minus Tide, which is a relatively new label from up in Mendocino, which of course is where an awfully high proportion of those 2% of certified organic vineyards are. And just 3 young people getting together. They've got full-time jobs elsewhere, but just as is happening in other parts of the world, just mad about wine and producing really keenly priced wines that would appeal to anyone from not their own vines because they can't afford them, but just picking up little parcels that are not of interest to the big boys.
So I think I should put us on the line for a minute. So, you know, we as media have a horrible habit of always looking for the newest thing.
Yes.
You know,
yeah.
And only writing about the newest thing. And of course, the substance of wine comes from what's established already. You know, the perpetuating traditions and things like that. So, what is it that we can say to producers that are more established? How do they capture the attention of communicators and media people?
It's a very good question. It's a bit like my husband, who's a restaurant critic, and all the established restaurants get so cross because they're never reviewed, you know. Well, I suppose probably keep refreshing labeling is probably a good idea, unless you're just selling every bottle hand over fist. But make it, you know, do some work, make sure it's appealing to the next generation of potential wine drinkers. Probably, and people may do this all the time, you know, benchmark, look at what else is out there at the same kind of price, make sure that it is slowly getting fresher in line with what younger people seem to want to be looking for. A lot of people, established wine producers, have a kind of separate organic range, don't they? That seems to shed a bit of virtue on the main range. What do you think? Get out there. I mean, if we're talking about export, travel. And because you do have this massive advantage of speaking English, which helps you in so many markets, and not just UK and Canada.
But also something we referenced before, go present with others.
With
others.
Help.
Because
Yeah.
it's immediately there's an interest element there. Oh, how did these guys get
Yeah.
together? What are what's that story?
Yeah. I'm also personally a bit of a fan of showing wines with food. And I've found that California wine producers seem less keen to show their wines with food than European ones. And perhaps that's a wild generalization that's inaccurate, I don't know. But after all, in my book and in my life, wine is served at the table. And it's great if you can prove and demonstrate that your wines are good with food. I'm not saying you've got to treat everyone to a 3-course meal, but just think about a casual get-together over some sort of food when you're presenting them to people.
Well, and the casual kind of takes the pressure off a little bit too.
Yeah.
For everybody. Yeah.
And Nick had this thought out of the blue because we were discussing ways forward for California wine abroad. And in his book, which is a sort of gastronomic book, he said, one thing that California doesn't have now, which it did have in the kind of, what for us was the sort of golden era when California wine was everywhere and covered with glory, I'm talking abroad here, is internationally famous chefs. I know there are masses of chefs who are famous within the United States, but there was a time, sort of the Jeremiah Tower and Alice Waters was everywhere, and
Wolfgang
Puck, yeah. And now maybe it's just that the world is big enough to be on US TV and they don't need to make a reputation abroad. But think what happened, what Ferran Adrià and the Roca brothers did for Spanish wine. It's a very symbiotic relationship, wine and food, in every sense. And if you could sign up a chef that's got some reputation, it probably would repay.
Well, and even bringing a chef who maybe is celebrated here and is still lesser known elsewhere, just bringing the chef already is a point of interest too.
Yeah,
but yes.
And that chef would have probably buddies abroad anyway, and it's just sort of spreading the love, really, isn't it?
Well, and one of the things I grew up commercial fishing for salmon in Alaska, and one of the things I've been asked to do more often recently is actually to talk about California wine in relation to Alaska salmon or Alaska seafood. That's another, so that's not a chef example, but it's still an example of bringing food together, because the truth is, what's a better pairing for Alaska salmon than California Pinot Noir, right? And the thing is, there's such a range of styles too. You can have really light Santa Rita Hills coastal Pinot Noir with lighter, lox style salmon, right? If you want to go to a more robust Santa Lucia Highlands Pinot, then suddenly you can grill the salmon. There's like this whole range of Pinot styles that works with different preparations of just this one example of food, right? And so that's another exciting way, I think, of bringing wine and food in relation to each other, too.
And adding some pizzazz and sort of extra interest to the story.
And it's another example of collaborating in a creative way.
Yeah.
One of the things you touched on packaging, labeling specifically, though, but I know that one of the things that you're passionate about is the glass problem. So do you want to comment on that a little bit?
Well, I don't think California is the worst offender in terms of, there's very, very heavy bottles that are cost an absolute fortune to ship around the planet. And as I understand it, in fact, more and more California wine is being shipped in bulk, actually, to export markets of the mass market level, which is very virtuous. And I think Gallo ship an awful lot by rail, don't they?
Within the United States,
yeah, which is, again, much, much better for the environment than trucking it. Although, obviously, there are temperature issues there. But I just think, if you're going to play the sustainability card, then obviously you've got to be very, very conscious that the aspects of wine that create the biggest carbon emissions are glass bottles and production of glass bottles and transporting them. Nothing to do with what's happening in the vineyard or the winery.
One of the challenges there, though, is that it is still true that public perception is heavy bottle equals important wine. And I think that comes back to an obligation people like we have. You know, as communicators, we need to help get across, well, actually, no, you can have a very good wine in a very light bottle or even in different packaging altogether.
Yeah, I mean, Chateau Lafite, actually, is a good example. It's always been in a very, very light bottle, and it certainly hasn't done it any harm. Think about its sales in China. I haven't mentioned China, have we? But I'm sure it will be focused, showcased later on. Yeah.
Yes. So what are some other suggestions that you have for California moving forward and thinking about leadership and also ways to open more markets?
Presence. Go because you're nice people. And when people realize you're nice people, instead of these spoiled gas guzzlers who have air conditioning everywhere, then it's all going to, you know, it's going to be easy peasy. So go and meet people. And you're so friendly and nice and efficient, which is a very, very rare, and speak English. You know, it's going to be a breeze. It's going to be a breeze. Maybe we should have some questions.
Yes. So we wanted to leave plenty of time for questions because we know that this is an enormous opportunity for each of you in the room to get Jancis Robinson to
and
respond
Elaine.
Directly to you, you know. But so here's the thing, though. My job is to be strict. Hopefully I'm still charming, but I'm going to be strict because the focus today, of course, is the global marketplace and the question of export. So as much as you want to ask Jancis, you know, how she fell in love with wine or what...
That's an easy question, though.
Okay.
I don't mind that
let's
one.
Let's do it real quick, just to get it out of the way then. How did you fall in love with wine?
I was at Oxford. I had a boyfriend whose father gave him slightly too much money. That translated into taking me out to eat. And I had one bottle of Chambon Musigny Les Amoureuses 1959 that was so fabulous that it was love at first sight with the wine.
So it's... Notice his name was not named. Yeah. You know, so one of the things, though, that I really appreciate about your career and you as a person is how open and curious you've always been.
Well, I think... well, we're very lucky, I should say, on jancisrobinson.com to have Elaine on the team, which is fabulous, and older as well. So I think we are very well represented in California. But my mentor was an extraordinary guy called Edmund Penning-Rousel, who was the archetypal Englishman, wore three-piece suits, a hat, gloves, and carried a cane, but was a subscriber to Marxism Today until his last breath. So that was a very unusual combination. He was my predecessor as wine correspondent of the Financial Times, and he always asked lots and lots of questions. And I'm sure both of us, we just continue to learn things every single day, huh? And I don't think you should be ashamed of asking questions, because otherwise you never learn anything. So.
My thought is that no matter how successful you are, no matter how much a person accomplishes, they'll always have far more to learn than they've done. And I think the more you can take that as your first step forward, I have so much more to learn.
Do you know that nice thing where if you know this much, the perimeter with your knowledge is sort of that much. But if you know that much, the perimeter with your ignorance is much
It just
bigger.
keeps getting, just keeps getting bigger.
Yeah.
Okay, so notice how nicely she just encouraged you to ask questions. But again, I must be strict. So your questions have to relate to the global marketplace and this idea of export and how to build for California, or I'll have to tease you about your socks and various other things. So please do help me by keeping your questions focused. And so we have one towards the top. Oh wait, I'm sorry. We're actually going to use a microphone, and somebody does have a microphone, but we'll get to you. Thank you.
Do
Right
introduce
next.
yourself too, won't you?
Hello, Jancis. It's Lorenzo Trefethen.
Hi.
And speaking as someone who very proudly grows Riesling and other strange varieties in the Napa Valley, You began to talk about the more international varieties that California grows a lot more of, but I was wondering if you could dig more into the opportunities for California Chardonnay, for Napa Valley Cabernet abroad.
Oh, so not Riesling, but Chardonnay and Cabernet.
Right, because you've, I think, correctly pointed to a move towards freshness, a move towards more interesting varieties, but you know, we've been doing this for a long time, and when we look around, it's really just green shoots. And even Steve Mathiasen will tell you, I love growing Ribolla Jala, but I sell about 10 times as much Chardonnay. And so thinking about, you know, just what we have to work with now and expanding our footprint internationally with what we have, it seems like it's going to need to be those more international, boring varieties.
Yes, it's an interesting tension. I think my impression is that certainly the markets such as the UK and Australia, and I think some other Northern European markets are really interested in alternatives to the famous international ones, though. And so you add luster to your brand if you can offer something other than Chardonnay and Cabernet. However fresh your wines have been for generations. So I certainly in our market, to arrive with just a Chardonnay and a Cabernet would, I think, make less of an impact than having something else, some other stories to tell.
I think it's harder to get people into the room for the tasting or the seminar if you just have the traditional varieties. You know, so having that little extra unexpected thing helps increase interest to get them in the door. But then once they're in the door, you know, the truth is someone like your family, the legacy piece really matters, and and can go a long way.
It's a great story, isn't it? Yeah. I would say that the British wine drinker typically is not quite as faddy as the typical New York Somm, but does actually enjoy novelty.
Well, and I think internationally, the kind of tradition and stalwart producers is still the bigger driver than the
Yes,
oddball grape,
yes.
for sure.
But as to sort of open the door, I think
Yes.
you probably need more than just the classics.
Well, and getting people in for seminars, you know, promising they get, you know, even if it's only one wine, but one wine they just can't get, you know. Oh, and you'll be the first to taste this, you know. First in the world, you know, like really first in the world to taste it, you know. Having some little extra thing that they can't get otherwise or they didn't expect to see kind of helps open that. So we had a question, the person that started, but then in the back, you had your hand up. There's a woman towards the back right there. Rebecca, if you could get her next. But yes, so you were starting to speak earlier.
Hi, I'm Chris from Canada. We import California wine. I had a question about when we were talking about heavy glass, about your opinion on canned wine, and where you think that will bring the California export possibly to a new level.
You want to go?
Well, it's hugely growing. Moving to canned wine, canned cider, canned alcoholic seltzer. It's this massive increase, especially in the United States. How are you seeing it elsewhere?
It's not as established in the UK, and nor certainly not in say France or anywhere, as it is here. But it's definitely growing. In fact, my Financial Times article a week on
end of this week.
No, it's actually this Saturday. Yeah. Is all about alternative forms of packaging, and already Marks and Spencer, you know, a bit of a landmark supermarket in the UK, their proportion of wine they sell in packages other than glass bottles is dramatically increasing and has reached 10%. And I think they are very bullish about cans. But that's a great attribute for California, that the canned technology and
we
habit
help
is
make
already
that.
established with producers. Yeah.
Well, and it's a great add-on for the sustainability question because a can is entirely recyclable. It's actually quite hard to recycle glass just because people...
And it uses energy. It uses a lot of energy.
Yeah, it uses energy to recycle glass, but it's actually entirely recyclable to use a can. And I know, the Silicon Valley Bank annual report came out this month, and it's a little more domestic focused, but nevertheless, part of the point that was made there was that we have to really reimagine wine right now, and we're moving from, into a new generation of drinkers. And in fact, actually, the greatest intergenerational wealth transfer in the history of the world is happening right now. So as of 2020, more than something ungodly like $24 trillion is in the hands of millennials right now. So if so maybe we need to get the media writing about how to make those connections, right? Another, there's a lot of worry that millennials aren't drinking as much wine. The thing is, though, if you look into it, it's not clear that they're drinking less wine than boomers did at the same age, right? So there's a kind of some perception issues, I think, around the millennial question. The truth is that actually 50% of wine drinkers are 35 and under. So the connections are made, but now increasing the interest is part of our job, right? In order to get the proportion of sales to increase there too. And the thing is, if you look at buying trends for millennials, they're very interested in experience. And but I don't mean they're only going to go skydiving. I'm saying they want to grab that can of wine and bring it on a hike because it's all about that experiential context. But they also like the wine that was made by the wife of the cheesemaker with the multicolored socks, right? Like they like the really local kind of quirky, the story, so that it's an experience and investment in community at the same time. So I think cans are a really smart thing to keep looking at. And they might serve the role that like the Riesling does for now, but there's a great opportunity to keep growing there, I think.
How established are cans in Canada, Chris? And what proportion of glass is effectively recycled in Canada? Do you know? I don't know. Yeah, I think it's 20% here or 30, and it's 50. Is it? Anybody know?
So
30.
Yeah.
30
so like
here. Yeah.
Ontario, actually, yes, you could answer that. 89%. Yeah. So Ontario actually has really helped lead the way with recycling, and the unfortunate truth is some of that is a result of 9/11. There's more kind of exchange and recycling exchange across the border pre 9/11, and then when the borders shut down, Canada had to get creative. How are we going to solve this problem? And so Ontario really led the way with recycling efforts. And I know there's incredible machines that actually read garbage almost like a grape sorter and kind of move things around to recycle properly. So Ontario's really leading on
Spread that technology, will you?
Yeah, help talk to people here and share that. So in the back, you had, that's great.
Good morning, my name is Lisa Allen. I run a winery called Corsi Graves in Bennett Valley. And this is, kind of the question around how do you kind of balance being on trend with authenticity, if you will? And that can come, for me, what's going through my mind is, cultivar selection. So if I'm an estate-driven brand, I can't, I don't have Riesling on my estate, but if that's a variety that we could pursue, again, it's not authentic, but yet it's trend. Or packaging, so cans on trend, but it's not true to my brand, or international standards that around sustainability and things like that. That what we do here may not resonate or mean anything overseas. So again, around grape selection practices, packaging. How do we blend or balance being on trend with being authentic?
So I think, if you don't mind me starting, that you can't follow trends in your vineyard. It takes too long, right? By the time they're online, the trends moved on. Like trends like that happen from sourcing fruit and larger buyers in that sense, right? So, especially with family-owned companies, I think the greatest strength is in finding and delivering your integrity. What does my place have the potential to show? what do I care about? You know, if you're making wines that you believe in and that genuinely come from the place that you have, people are going to respond to that. And so I think, you know, there's a lot of producers in California that, you know, the classic story is Corison, right? Kathy Corison stuck to her guns, kept her style even as trends changed through the 90s and early 2000s, and lo and behold, you know, after 30 years, she became the biggest overnight success, right? So, and obviously that's really difficult, but I think if you're actually an estate-driven model, you have to err on the side of authenticity, but it has to be real, you know.
And if I could just add, also really objectively identify what your distinguishing marks are. You know, everyone says they pick at optimum ripeness and have,
Yeah.
but genuinely look at everybody else and what do we have that nobody else has?
And seeing how other people are talking about wine and recognizing I can't just say the same thing, right? You know, getting out, that's another great example of that collaboration. How do I have a conversation that shows who I am and what I care about and what I make in a way that distinguishes me because it's truly me? You know, one of the challenges, so California has all of the information for all the wine online, which is great. But if you actually start looking at tech sheets and looking at websites, they're unbelievably repetitive and boring. And you know, and I honestly think one of the best things wine can do is look to completely different industries for inspiration. You know, so as an example, wine enthusiasts several years ago realized they needed to do a reboot, and so they brought in music photographers and fashion photographers and decided they weren't going to use wine photographers anymore. And it completely changed the look of the magazine and kind of reignited the magazine. And I think if we can learn from that example, you know, and if you're trying to learn to communicate and what distinguishes you, look to other styles of communication we are unbelievably myopic in wine.
And other channels, of course.
Yeah,
as
other
well.
channels too.
But human stories, if they're good, are unbeatable. Yeah.
Then someone in the back over here.
Hi, my name is Matt Iconis. I own brick and mortar with my wife, Alexis. Kind of piggybacking on cans, we had a question regarding serving size and how that plays into the overarching trend between lower alcohols, less alcohol in general. And as a secondary question, when it comes down to packaging, using terms like gluten-free, no sugar, no added sugar, and kind of something that I feel like as a wine industry we don't like to use. We think it's a little gimmicky, but when it comes down to what the actual consumer wants, both here and abroad, how that factors into what we should be doing. Because we make a good amount of cans, and whether we do 375s only, whether we add 250s, whether we say gluten-free on our can or no carbs, or how you want to play that game. And when it comes down to how we market the wine, the question, I guess, is how is it perceived, those types of terms outside of California?
Well, I think, gluten-free is a winner. Vegan is even more of a winner. And I don't blame you for putting them on, you know, at that market. 375, is that 375 centiliters, 375 milliliters? That half bottle in a can, that's big. I would, what's the standard can size here?
I don't even.
200.
They've been sorting that one out, basically. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, like, that's an easy trend to follow, right? Like, you can't follow trends in your vineyard. You can follow trends on your packaging. You know, I mean, I bet your wine has always been gluten-free. You know, I don't know anybody that's using flour for filtering, you know. But it turns out people like to see that on a website or on a package. It's actually not a big change to make. You know, just put the GF on there.
And no added sugar is a win-win, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Rebecca
has one over here.
Yeah, I just wanted to correct one thing. IWCA stands for International Wineries for Climate Action.
Climate action.
Great.
Thank you.
Good.
It's an important
That makes
distinction.
more sense. Thank you. Great.
Elaine and Jancis, we have a whole audience of people who are not in this room, and they've been sending in questions fast and furiously. So they're live streaming. So there's like 100 questions standing out there for you.
So you know.
But one of the questions they wanted to ask many times is, what's the perception of wines from the Central Valley outside outside of the U.S.?
I think if you say Central Valley on the label, it probably isn't much of a plus point. But if you stick the name of one of the counties on the label, that's probably quite exotic, and foreigners don't know where it is, and it'll go off the shelf. There are so many AVAs now that, yeah, and because Chile's got its Central Valley as well, hasn't it? And it sort of says this is the workhorse. But I mean, it normally says California, doesn't it, on a label? And there's some. I think there's some good work to be done on inexpensive wine that with a little bit of character from the Central Valley, and maybe that could be a useful niche just above the kind of commodity level, and could make some friends for California. Most people outside the US are looking for bargains.
Rebecca, you have someone up there?
Yeah, thank you both for your time today. Adam Ivor here with Gliding Eagle. I have a question. We do international direct-to-consumer. And I have a question for you both on what is the largest growth opportunity you see for California U.S. wines overseas? Looking both from a customer acquisition point, like how do we increase points of consumer acquisition overseas? And trying to find other routes to market outside of the traditional model where we have no end consumer data, where we only get paid FOB, where we're 60 days on the water. All these problems are super fragmented and murky distribution. So what is the biggest potential growth?
I think you've hit on a really good potential seam there, because direct, you're not going to have to convince some foreign importer who's got a sort of skewed perception of California wine to add your wines to their portfolio. Fortunately, in the UK, we have a small number of younger, kind of trendy importers who are linking up with some of these wines in the mid-range, and it's looking rosier than it has done for some time. But I didn't hear, you're not Naked Wines, no. But I think they've had some success in identifying personalities, winemakers, and selling California wine. They've certainly done it from wines elsewhere through the story of those people. No, I think that sounds good.
Well, and the truth is too, that's a high-level problem, right? Like any individual producer is not going to be able to solve that very effectively for themselves, and so I'm going to be bold and say, like, talk to California Wine, right? Like, this is an issue that, a larger regional body like California Wine is in a great position to work directly with producers like you to help solve this problem. How to make export easier, and of course today is all about how to understand the channels into specific markets as well. But this selling direct point hits again on the way things are moving with the new generation of wine buyers coming in. They're buying for convenience. They're buying online. They want immediacy. They want ease, and they want experience. All of those things happen through technology, which the wine industry, to be honest, needs to catch up on, right? So, but there are already channels in place with other regions around the world are using them to sell direct from their country to another country without going through the distribution channels. Because the truth is, one of the biggest challenges in the country and in the world is, getting through the distributor channels. And with this increase in the ability to sell direct and use technology to do it, we're kind of getting around that problem in a lot of ways. Steve, you have someone there?
Alexandra Lafontaine with Saint Michel Wine Estates. Hi. There is a known oversupply of wine currently. What are your thoughts of making it through the next few years gracefully without giving in too much on price?
Yeah. It's hard. Yeah.
Presumably, there are going to be an even greater profusion of new labels from people buying on the bulk market.
One of the challenges is, it's a global oversupply of wine, right? So this is not just a California problem, this is a world problem. And then in California, the truth is people have been trying to plant to trend, and so we've created an oversupply of fruit as well, of grapes. And so California is dealing with an oversupply of wine and an oversupply of grapes, and we're in the process of seeing wine prices go way down because of that, and it's actually more expensive to farm than to sell bulk now, which is a horrible situation for growers to be in, and vineyards are being pulled as a result. So it's a challenge. It's really hard. And I feel like I would want to hear from all of you on ideas, right? Because we're in a room full of people with ideas on exactly how to answer that question, and that would be the better way to find answers to that question. But that's about collaboration again. Okay, Rebecca, you had?
Right over here.
Oh, yeah, here. Yeah, Will. Yeah.
Hi, Will Costello, Master Sommelier. I work with the Miller family of Bien Nacido in Santa Barbara. We are hosting this in beautiful Napa Valley, arguably one of the best-known California brands. Is California roughly equated to Sonoma and Napa still internationally? Or if not, what other regions have shown promise in the export market?
I think it isn't the case by any means that it's still a Napa, Sonoma-dominated picture. I think your area has done a lot to particularly make these cooler, fresher Pinots and Chardonnays in particular. But I also see all these people, we're going to be looking at, and Sonoma Coast, of course, has done its thing, but, Mendocino is quite a hot spot for the new people. And then good old Ridge is, I think, deserves, I don't know if there's anyone here from Ridge, but I take my hat off to Ridge as being the most faithful exporter of top quality California wine at decent prices that exists. And Paul Draper has come to Britain kind of every year for as long as I've been writing about wine. And I think it's paid off for them. They have faithful importers, faithful customers. And it's, if you can do something consistently, that's all to the good. So, sorry, I was mentioning them because, of course, they're not Napa or Sonoma. I can understand your sort of, I sense a slight frustration of, Napa, Sonoma get all this. But I don't think it's the case anymore. And in fact, there are some negatives about, as I said at the beginning, some negatives attached to Napa in international perception, I'm afraid.
Yeah, so I do, seminars on wine for groups that come here from all over the world, and I also go out into markets all over the world and talk about not just California, but when I'm talking about California, like we were in Manila in October and created a seminar that was 10 wines, 10 regions, 10 varieties. And so there was one Napa wine, there was one Sonoma wine, and then there were 8 other regions and 8 other wines. And the response in Manila was they were so excited because they knew there were more than Napa and Sonoma, but no one brings those wines there, and they want those wines there. And I gave a seminar just a couple months ago to a group that was here from Canada, and it was actually the same kind of thing. Like they, people are well aware of Napa and Sonoma, but they're actually really want to know more about California. And a group was just here from China, and when they arrived, they wanted to see all the famous Napa places, but they got diverted to Lodi for a day, and it turned out one of their favorite stops was Lodi. So I think when people are hungry for more, but don't necessarily know more, and that's part of our job as communicators and in education. But it's also, if you're coming in from Santa Maria Valley, like keep getting the word out, and again, finding creative ways to keep getting the word out. It's really expensive. I think the more you can travel, as Jancis is saying, the better. People get in, if you go to markets that are less developed, they're so hungry for people to be there in person that they become endeared
Really
to you.
repays, yeah.
And they become loyal to you, and it pays off. You know, like the Chapelet Shannon example, they've made sure they go into Calgary for decades now, and they go Chapelet Shannon. You know, so that kind of personal connection helps a lot. But it is expensive to travel, so if you can form groups that present each other's wines, that also endears those wines, not just you, to those regions. You know, so there's ways to kind of build the story that doesn't only depend on you.
And just a tiny footnote to the group thing, you know, putting time aside to learn about more than one producer is really valuable, whether you're an importer or a media or whatever. Yeah.
Well, and it evolves your insight as a wine producer too, when you work together like that. Rebecca? Yeah.
Good morning, Jancis. Good morning, Elaine. David Amadea from Ridge. I did sneak in.
Well, I hope you will pass on the compliment.
I certainly will. Yeah, I got through the Cabernet curtain. I got in here. Question for you, Jancis. Now that the dust is settling around Brexit, what is your view for the UK wine trade in general moving forward, and obviously specifically for California wine?
Well, it can't do California wine any harm, put it that way, which is great, except that our currency is just... I'm sorry to sound less than enthusiastic when the B word is mentioned, but honestly, for the last 3 years plus, we have just been in limbo, sort of where nobody feels they can make any decisions, move forward, and even now, even though we've got old Boris in with a thumping majority, we still don't know what kind of trade deals we're going to do, if at all. It's a bit like the kind of, you know, Constellation Gallo question mark thing. No one can make a decision on how that will pan out. So I'm sorry, but all I can say is I think it will be good for California, relatively.
So we only have time for one more question, and you already have the mic, so please.
Hi, and actually it worked out very well because I used to live in the UK, and I'm Cheryl Lincoln with the Wine Alchemist, and my interest has always been the UK market and what we can do there, and there seems to be opportunity, and there's a new team in place, a dynamic duo, and back in the day, Jancis, I think you're aware of Jeffrey Roberts, and he was a huge proponent and an advocate for California wines before his passing. And with so much wine being available on the market, and maybe there's going to be a free trade agreement with the UK, I mean, who knows what's going to happen now? Is there an opportunity for a California brand ambassador to permeate the UK market like a Jeffrey Roberts?
Well, we have a bit of a UK California wine ambassador in the UK here, don't we, Damien? Somewhere? Okay. Okay, sort of more commercial, you mean actually importing wine?
It was very well received by all the corner of critics. You know, he was very well received, and he got the wine in front of the right people, and there was a lot of traction.
Yeah.
Back in the day.
I think I would, for the moment, I'd be putting my hope in this new wave of smaller producers. Like just before I came here, I left London, I went to a tasting put on by Nectar, Nekter, which is a young guy, ex-banking or something, but trying to disrupt the whole structure of the UK trade. And really, the attendance level at his very cramped little tasting was extraordinary. Lots of influential somms, mainly, young people.
Well, and lots of hard-to-get wines, though, too, right?
Yeah, but good prices. Yeah. Or more okay prices.
Right.
By a UK level, still high. Yeah. But at least he's creating a buzz for California wine, and there are about three outfits like him. I think Jeffrey was starting off as being the prime one importer of California wine, and I think California's probably moved on from needing just one person doing that.
I know in Germany and Mexico, though, there are people that are working as brand ambassadors for California, and so people are trying that approach out elsewhere too. So I think we have to wrap up. I hope you have enjoyed and gotten some things, and even if there's been hard things to hear, I hope you can see it's all in good faith and love for California. And so if you could help me thank Jancis.
And thank Elaine.